Chilling tales for dark nights.
Max Hellier was never able to explain exactly what it was that woke him from his normally deep sleep. He could usually sleep through any disturbance. The room was pitch black, and although there was no light of any sort from the window, a faint bluish glimmer permeated the gloom. It was a weird, pulsating reflection of light, unlike any Hellier had ever seen. Then he noticed that the light was surrounding the reflection of the bedroom door in the mirror on the opposite wall. But it was something else that almost made his heart stop beating. For although he could see nobody beside him in the bed, a quick glance to the side showed a definite indentation of the pillow and the outline of a body beneath the blankets. Even worse, there was a sudden, intense coldness beside him, almost as if he were lying beside a corpse. He glanced in the mirror again and stifled a scream of horror. Hellier couldn't see himself reflected in the dark mirror, but there was another man lying there. A burly, bearded, handsome man with a swarthy complexion. And at that instant, Hellier could hear the man's heavy breathing. Then, still in the mirror, he saw the bedroom door open slowly and a woman peer in. Her eyes were fixed on the figure of the bearded man on the bed. Hellier watched as she crept up to the man with a horrible feline stealth and gripped the sleeper's throat with her long, bony fingers. He stared silently at the mirror as she squeezed the last breath of life from the hefty man. Then suddenly, the hideous drama ended. The picture faded. And Hellier was once more alone in the room. Badly shaken by this experience, Hellier wished he had stayed somewhere else. He had disliked the room in the inn in Munich as soon as he saw it, especially the tall mirror that overshadowed the room, reflecting every movement, every tiny disturbance. Hellier, like many people, never slept on the left side of his bed, and now, as he sat shivering in the huge bed staring at the empty mirror, he was grateful for his habit of sleeping on the right. He sank thankfully back into the pillows and tried to blot the dreadful vision of murder from his mind. In the morning, he was not sure that he had either dreamed the incident or else that his tired brain had run riot. He would have left the inn that very day, except that he met an old army buddy walking through Munich. Franz Braun was down on his luck. His heart had always been in painting, but Hellier knew that he had little talent. Braun had no job, no money, and that very morning had been evicted from his lodgings. Hellier offered Braun a meal at the inn and a night's lodging, not only out of friendship. Hellier wanted to see if Braun, too, would see the strange scene in the mirror. It turned out that now, in 1952, Braun had changed little from his war days. He wined and dined lavishly on Hellier's money and spent the whole evening flirting with the barmaid. Hellier had already gone up to the room when Braun came bustling in. "She had to get back to work," he told Hellier, "so we may as well turn in for the night." Hellier nodded. Braun said, "The girl warned me not to sleep on the left side of the bed. I wonder why." Hellier had not told Braun about the apparitions in the mirror, but Braun was skeptical anyway about supernatural experiences. They settled down to sleep, Braun on the left side of the bed. It was hours later when Hellier woke to find that the room was deadly cold, and in the mirror at the foot of the bed, the bedroom glowed again with that ghostly light. He stared at the reflection. There was no sign of himself or Brown in the mirror, but the form of the heavy, dark-skinned man was once more lying on the left-hand side. Hellier turned to look at the form beside him, but the face on the pillow was that of Franz Brown. Hellier looked back to the mirror, and just as it had on the previous night, the door in the mirror opened slowly. The same gaunt, marble-like face peered in, and with brutish determination, the figure crept towards the bed, its face contorted with malice. The cruel white fingers settled once more on the throat beneath the man's bushy beard. Hellier watched, fascinated, as the woman's hands clasped tighter and tighter. Then, as the shuddering form in the mirror grew still, both figures vanished. Braun had not stirred at all during the drama, but now Hellier turned to his friend and shook him. Brown could not be roused. Alarmed, Hellier snapped on the light, and then he let out a cry of sheer terror. Brown was dead. On his throat were 2 red marks, slowly fading from sight. Hellier's scream roused everybody. The doctor who was called attributed Brown's death to heart failure, but Hellier knew that Brown had been as healthy as a young horse. The next day, he questioned the barmaid, who had warned Brown about sleeping on the left-hand side of the bed. The girl looked at him uncertainly before saying, "I was right to warn him, Herr Hellier." The last few people who slept on the left side of that bed died in exactly the same way.
The day I found my first hole was the day my best friend came back from the dead. We were in high school and stupid. Jake was his name, and we liked to go out to this old abandoned house in the woods after school to just screw around, do stupid teenage things. It was a pretty big place, to be honest. 2-story house with a basement, or 3 stories if you count the small attic above it. The story is supposed to go that an old woman was building the house years and years ago in order to get away from city life, but, for some reason, never finished it. Probably died. Anyways, the house was pretty close to completion when she stopped, but no one bothered to finish it, and now it just sits there rotting away. So Jake and I would go to the house and just screw around, scaring each other or exploring the place, whatever we felt like. Usually we were careful, or lucky, but nothing ever happened to make us worry. Then the floorboards broke under Jake's feet when we were exploring the second floor, and he fell. I never realized how bad the condition of the house must have been, because when he hit the first floor, that broke too, and he fell into the basement. I ran down and looked through the broken hole in the first floor. It was dark. We usually had the foresight to bring flashlights, so I shined a light on him. I'll never forget what I saw. One of the boards, or something, must have fallen at just the right angle when Jake hit the ground. It speared him right up through his stomach. I could see him shift and try and grab at it. Even hear him gurgle. And then he stopped. He was dead. I was sure of it. Our stupidity got him killed. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. So I just ran. I ran out of the house and left him there. It was about evening when I got home, and I went straight to my room. I didn't talk to anyone. Didn't stop for anything. I just wanted to curl up and try and forget that scene. My parents tried to talk to me, but I feigned sleep, and they just went on. Later at night, we got a call from Jake's parents asking where he was. They actually woke me up for that one, and I said I had no idea. The usual, "Well, if you see him, please let us know," came afterwards, and I just nodded before I went back to sleep. The next day was school, and I went through the morning ritual in a bit of a trance. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't stay home. I'm pretty sure Jake's parents already expected something of me. So I went. School was just like usual. people screwing around in the morning and talking. I went up to my normal group of friends that I hung out with before the first bell rang, and my heart stopped. There was Jake. He stood there, just laughing and being his normal self. When he saw me, he looked over and grinned before coming over. He made a joke, but I didn't hear it. I just continued to stare. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked me, starting to get concerned. Are you okay?" was all I could muster back. "Well, yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He laughed a bit, but gave me a weird look. You don't, know anything?" I tried to phrase it as delicately as possible. I didn't want anyone else knowing, but I figured that was enough to clue him in. If it did, he didn't show it. "Know anything of what?" he responded, and then the bell rang. He said bye and gave me a weird look before heading off to class. I just stared after in shock. Why was my friend here? I saw him die! At the very least he should be in the hospital, but he was fine. I went to class, but I couldn't concentrate. I just kept thinking about Jake and how he should be dead. I kept thinking about how he could have survived, but I couldn't fill in this strange hole of a mystery. After class, I decided to check out the house. Jake met me after school and asked if I still wanted to hang out. I told him I wasn't feeling well and we'd catch up tomorrow. He seemed to accept that and move off. It's not like I wasn't excited my friend was back, but looking at him made something in me cringe. He shouldn't be alive. He should not be here. I saw him. So I went to the house that afternoon alone. When I walked in, I could feel something. It was strange but familiar. It's the same feeling I got when I looked at Jake. That something wasn't right. It was just off. However, here, it felt like a lingering feeling. Not this fresh, what the hell I got when I saw my friend. I stepped forward and looked down. Sure enough, there was that damn hole he fell through. I let out a sigh of relief and bent over. So I wasn't crazy. I slipped out my usual flashlight and snowed down the hole. Yes, there was the wreck I saw land on him. Just no Jake. Did he get free? Did he magically regenerate or something? I shone my flashlight up to look at the hole in the second floor. It wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat and began to frantically shine my light up to the ceiling. Where was it? I should be right under the damn hole in the floor. But nothing. I bolted up the stairs and sure enough, there was nothing in the floor where he fell. Nothing. Something was wrong. Really wrong. I wandered back down to the first hole and peeked down into it. I'm sure that was the moment that solidified my fate. If I had just ignored it, moved on, been plain happy my friend was back, I might have been able to continue life as usual. But that's the moment. I saw something. Just a flash of something black. Blacker than the darkness beyond my flashlight's range shifted fly out of sight. I gasped and stumbled back, breathing heavily. I know I should have run, but my curiosity took hold. In my logical side, it was just some animal or trick of light. So I swallowed my fear and leaned over to peek again. I didn't see the flash of black again, but I did notice something. The boards of the wreckage underneath the hole were gone. With that note, I knew something was wrong. Nobody can clean up something like that mess in the blink of an eye. I bolted. I ran out of that house through the forest, swearing up and down something was chasing me. I had the feeling that there was something out there. But now I know it's simply watching me. For now. I ran home and slammed the door shut behind me before I leapt into my bed. My body curled up and I just lay there trying to comprehend what was going on. It took me a while, but I finally drew myself out of bed. I had to figure out what was going on, but like hell I was going back to that damn house. Not if some monster was in it. So I did what any teenager would do. I went to the internet and researched. It was slow and I didn't have a lot of luck at first. Looking up paranormal just got me weird pictures and stories. Friend Comes Back from the Dead got me a lot of zombie stuff. Missing Time seemed to get me a little more info. A lot of it was around aliens, but a few stories seemed to pique my interest. Like something crazy seemed to happen, like a car crash or an accident. And suddenly, there's a time jump and things seem to be okay. Like nothing ever happened. There was one post on the Missing Time board that seemed to draw my attention, however. It was titled, Plot Holes, and it was only posted a couple days ago. I curiously clicked it. Everyone seemed to speculate what caused the whole missing time thing. A lot of the time it was aliens or dimensional whatever. This guy, however, acted like he knew for a fact, and his reason was the most bizarre of them all. He started telling a similar story. In a nutshell, his wife was killed in a household accident when part of their house caved in during a storm. While trying to get her, he was knocked out by some other debris. When he came to, he was sitting in the living room and his wife was trying to wake him up. The house was fine, with no sign of disaster, and she was alive. He was ecstatic, but described a strange feeling, like he figured out something he shouldn't have, and that his wife shouldn't be there. Like that feeling I got with Jake. Over time, he couldn't be around her. It was just too strange. So he left. He went on the road, taking what money he had and doing weird little jobs here and there while staying in motels. While he went, he began to research. It took a great amount of time, but he found others with similar experiences. Most of them just described it as a miracle and moved on with their lives. Others couldn't shake that feeling like he did. All of them described the same sort of thing. Some event should have caused something to happen. A person to die or some landmark to be destroyed, only to have it miraculously come back later. So what was going on? The author was at a standstill until he came across something. While researching people who shouldn't be alive, he came across a book review. Apparently, it was the latest in a series, and, in it, a side character saves the day by fighting a bunch of enemies for the heroes. However, in the previous book, by a different author, that character had been killed. So, this character couldn't have come back to save the day, but, if he didn't, the main characters would have died. The reviewer said it was one of the worst plot holes he had ever seen. That got the forum author, and me, thinking. He said he'd post again after he experimented a bit, and I didn't blame him. I had a few things I wanted to experiment with as well. Nevertheless, I dropped him a message saying I read his post and that something similar happened to me, then called it a night early. I had to be extremely alert if I was going to try and look for the signs I wanted to find. The next morning, I woke up and started my first attempt at looking for a plot hole. I know how crazy that sounded, but something seemed to click after reading that review. Someone should have died, but that was ignored so he could do something of significance later. It sounded so familiar. The first few days I didn't notice anything, except that weird feeling around Jake. Nobody else seemed to have it. The third day was when I noticed my first plot hole. It was minor, the most minor of details, but it was there. One of the girls in my class went from wearing a skirt to a set of jeans between periods. I know how that seems to make me look, but I'll admit, the skirt was why I noticed. But to change into a pair of jeans within 7 minutes while walking across campus to another class? That doesn't make sense. I guess it was possible, but it didn't make sense. It was like a costume got wrong during a scene change. After that, it all went downhill. I kept seeing changes everywhere. A sign would be black in the morning, but light green later at night, or a friend would go from wearing a sweater to a t-shirt when I looked away for a moment. You think people would notice these changes, but nobody did. Maybe it was the strange feeling that I got of something being off after the accident with Jake, or perhaps you just had to be looking for them. But, as I kept looking, they were everywhere. It was about a week and a half later before I got a response back from the plot holes author. He had introduced himself as Dennis and apologized for being late to respond. His reason why? He had gotten caught up in observing plot holes. He was noticing the same thing I was. This was the first time I had actually spoken to the guy, but the changes he described matched mine to a T, except for one thing. After noticing a misspelled sign above a store late at night, he turned away for a moment to look back and saw a shadowy black figure floating by it. It was hazy, like looking at a figure through a fog that just wasn't there, but after being floated away, the spelling error was gone. A shiver went down my spine. That seemed too close to whatever I might have glimpsed at the house. I hadn't seen it full on yet, but then now I knew what I was looking for. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't long before I began to see them. You had to look at just the right moment, I found out. When it seemed like nobody was watching or paying attention to that little error you just noticed, then you could make it out. A shadowy haze of a being, seeming to be dressed in a long black robe with a hood, messing with it until it changed. I saw one fade my friend's t-shirt into a jacket/shirt set on a cold day in class. And I saw another one change an entire stack of books at the library into a completely different set before they were picked up by a student. Nobody noticed them, just like the holes. It was like you had to be on that wavelength to notice. I'd been conversing with Dennis a bit online, and he agreed with the idea. It seemed that you had to notice one to start seeing the others. If you could brush it off, then your life would go on. But if you were the curious sort, then you were like the two of us. You'd just keep seeing them all the time.
You just keep seeing them all the time.
You're starting to go crazy. Crazy.
I couldn't say anything to anyone, and Jake kept bothering me about why we never hung out anymore. I just couldn't look at him. He wasn't natural, but I realized it wasn't him. It was those things that brought him back. Maybe he had some destiny or something, but I had no idea. Things took yet another turn when I was having a Skype conversation with Dennis. He asked if they noticed me yet. I told him no, and he got quiet for a long time. After some bugging, he finally responded and told me that one of his friends that was helping him look into this occurrence was gone. Nobody even seemed to remember his existence. When he went over to that friend's house, Dennis found it relatively neat, save a few items strewn about. As he explored, the belongings that were out of place began to find themselves back into their positions. Dennis was sure it was one of those creatures behind it, and he confirmed his suspicions when he saw one putting a book back that had been thrown on the floor. And then turn and look at him. The two stared for a long time, the creature gazing onto Dennis while he looked into a blank nothingness that was its face, the dark hood covering whatever might have lurked underneath. And then it left. It turned and seemed to float right away through one of the walls. That seemed to be the last thing out of place then. The house looked like nothing had ever happened to it. Then Dennis began to notice something else. There were no pictures or objects identifying the owner. Unless you were that much of a hermit, you had, at least, an old family picture of some parents or something. Or maybe some meal with your name on it. But nothing. It was like nobody had ever lived in this fully furnished home. At that point, I began to worry. Dennis's friend had gone missing and nobody knew of his existence. I started putting the pieces together then. If these creatures could bring someone back from the dead, they could easily get rid of someone, right? This meant I was in danger. After that, I stopped. I was out. I ignored Dennis's messages. I tried to ignore all the holes I constantly noticed. I did my best to ignore those shadow creatures when I caught them. I even tried to hang out with Jake. But every time we hung out, it was like I was looking at the face of a lie. And looking at him made me think of those creatures. I imagined one pulling him up from that debris, slipping that board through and out of his body, knitting up his wounds like nothing ever happened. I did my best to look past it all. Dennis was hard to ignore, however. He kept tracking me down. I'd block him from my email and messengers, but he'd start making new accounts to talk to me to send me more messages. He seemed to be sending more and more as the days went on. Finally, one day, I received an email from a new account that clearly was Dennis. I was about to delete it and block him again, but then the subject chilled me to the bone.
They're after me. Get on Skype. I need help.
I didn't know what to do. If Dennis was in trouble from those things, then I had to help. I couldn't just leave him, but after him, they might turn their sights on me. I had to help. I wasn't going to leave him hanging, especially if he was in danger. I logged onto Skype, added his new account, and immediately got a video chat request. Dennis was in his apartment, the lights off, and he looked terrified. "What's going on?" I asked as I leaned in. "They've been following me around." His voice an exasperated whisper. "More and more of them keep coming around, and not just to fill holes. They're watching me." "Are you sure?" In response, he lifts up his laptop and carried it out to what looked to be the kitchen. He set it down in front of a window and drew back the curtains. I couldn't make out anything until he turned on the lights. Then my heart stopped. I had only seen one of them at a time. Maybe two if something was a particularly big change. But there was at least 3 or 4 behind the window, just staring at him with those empty, hooded faces. He quickly flicked off the light and turned the laptop back towards him. "Do you see? I don't know what to do. I don't want to end up like Jerry. Tell me what to do!" He was getting more and more anxious. I had no idea what to tell him. I didn't know what these things were. I didn't know what they wanted, or how to stop them. I opened my mouth but couldn't form the words that he needed to hear. As I stammered to find out what to say, I saw them slip into the background behind him. Through a freaking wall with a cabinet. "Dennis!" I yelled. "Behind you!" He turned just as the first approached. God, there were a bunch slipping in now. 3, then 4, then 5. He never stood a chance. The first one reached forward with an inky arm and shoved it straight through his chest. There wasn't any blood or even a sound save for Dennis's terrified scream. He began to writhe, grasping at his chest as this creature held him there by, I don't know what. His spine, his heart, hell, it could have been his very soul for all I knew.
He never stood a chance. They're watching me.
And then the others were on top of him. They fell onto him like a dark dog pile, consuming him in their dark presences. I couldn't scream. I couldn't look away. I just watched as he faded from view as those creatures piled onto him. Then, slowly, ever so slowly, they backed away. Dennis was gone. I bit back tears as I saw that empty space he had been in. I knew what had happened. He was gone. Erased. Nobody would even remember him. He was a hole that had to be filled in and taken care of. Then their attention turned to the computer. To me. My eyes widened as realization hit me. I was another hole. I was an issue in their grand scheme. A thorn that had to be plucked. A part that drew attention to the inaccuracies of this world they were trying to design. And I had to be taken care of. I didn't even bother to turn off the computer. I just stood and turned only to find myself face to face with a horde of them. In my own house. In my own room. My back went back to my desk as one shadowy shade glided toward me. Its arm rose, and I could almost make out the tendrils of its foggy black cloak and individual digits on its dark fingers. I couldn't move. I was frozen. And then it struck. I didn't physically feel the hand shove into my chest, but I felt it somewhere deeper, like it was grabbing an intimate part of my being. I felt violated, exposed, most of all, completely terrified. I screamed as it began to squeeze. It hurt. It hurt so much. My vision blurred, but I could see the others move around me. They filled in a circle around my body, regardless if there was something in their way or not. They just glided through like those things weren't there. And then they fell upon me. Black hit me from every side. I screamed, but no sound came out. I could feel that hand wrenching back, pulling something so personal to me away. My body felt limp, then I started to feel nothing. It inched along my limbs, slowly turning feeling of cold, pain, terror into absolute nothing. I could only describe it as a feeling of being erased. There was feeling, strong feeling, and then nothing. It slowly inched along, riding up along my arms and legs until it consumed my whole being. The pain faded along with it, along with the sounds of the world and my vision before me. Soon, nothing was before me but pure blackness. I was gone. I knew it. I was dead. Or worse, I didn't exist any longer. Stretched out before me was nothing but darkness. I tried to call out into the void, to claw my way forward, but I couldn't move a limb. More like, though, I didn't have a limb to move or a mouth to yell. I was just an essence, a leftover floating in the endless void of nothing. I'm still there, in the pure nothingness. I can't move, or I don't think I have anything left to move. It's gone. Every part of me is gone. I wonder what happens now. I wonder what Jake's destiny was. I also began to wonder if this was death or something worse. A punishment for sticking my nose in places it shouldn't be. Is this death or pure erasure? I'm sure Dennis is feeling the same things I'm feeling. I can almost imagine him too, floating in the same void. Maybe one day we'll meet each other. It's a hope that I try to keep alive. It keeps me saying that I might, one day, not be alone here. That's the end of my story. I wish it was better. I wish I could say I fought back and saved myself. At least, that I was on the run. But some plots don't have happy endings. However, I'm sure I've left you wondering one final thing. If I'm dead, erased, then how have I written this? Well, my poor friend, you've just discovered your first plot hole. Be wary if you see any more.
A kleptomaniac is a person who can't help but steal, and they could almost be forgiven for it. Me? Well, I'm a thieving bastard. I don't have to steal, I don't need to, but I like to. I don't have any excuses either. An excuse would suggest that I felt in some way guilty, which I don't. Not me. If a shop or store doesn't have the right security, or some sod doesn't have his wallet in his inside pocket, well, they pay stupid tax. About 3 years ago, I was taking a walk along the high street when I noticed a new shop had opened. It was a small bric-a-brac shop, full of the normal old furniture, paintings, timepieces, and old coins you would expect to find in such a place. Walking in, I noted only one old man behind the desk, and after a few minutes concluded he was the entirety of the staff. It was time for me to have a little fun. I found a small pocket watch which felt old, cast iron, and almost industrious. That will do, I thought, turning to see that the lone shopkeeper was even kind enough to have his back to me. Think about it, here he is. He's new in town, just opened the shop, and won't even acknowledge his first customer. Well, his tough luck, I thought, as I pocketed the watch and calmly strolled to the door. I think the phrase is blunt force trauma, but I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that getting a big oak table leg wrapped around the back of my head was both blunt and more than a bit traumatic. I was probably down for a minute or two, but by the time I was back on my feet and a bit more with it, the shop owner was between me and the door, holding the biggest sodding knife I have ever seen. Lad, you want to make sure you know who you're stealing from before you try. You put that watch in your pocket in clear sight of my little camera here. He pointed to where he had previously stood, when, I thought, he could not see me. Pointing at the wall, he revealed a security camera pointing right at the spot where I had pocketed the watch. "You even walk slow enough for me to turn the camera off and grab something to lump you with, you silly little git." I was caught, good and proper. I asked the shopkeeper in, I must confess, a very pathetic voice, if he had called the police. He replied in a softer tone this time. "Son, I caught you red-handed and on tape. Here's the deal, son. I have a close friend who is a parish priest of the church up top of the high street. What I want you to do is go to confession. Tell him not just about today, but all your sins, and carry out your penance. I will call him to say he should expect you there tonight at 9. The shopkeeper, an old greying man, but being over 6'5", with a big frame and also a massive knife, had given me a pass. All I had to do was go to confession, tell the priest my sins, and knock out a few Hail Marys. Well, I agreed. We amazingly exchanged a polite goodbye, and I was out. Thinking about what happened made me laugh as I walked home. It had been just under a year since the last time I was caught, and instead of spending a few months, all expenses paid, in one of Her Majesty's lovely prisons, all I had to do was an evening down the church. 9 o'clock rolled round, and I found myself sitting in the small confession booth. It took Priesty Boy forever to begin. Well, for 10 minutes at least, I could feel his gaze through the crossed-hat patrician in the booth. I'll be honest, it was a little unnerving. Eventually, he spoke. "You may begin when you are ready, my son." At that moment in time, for some reason, the shop owner's words came to my mind, and I decided to have some fun. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been 18 years since my last confession." At the 20-minute mark, I could tell old Priesty Boy was getting more and more impatient for me to finish confessing in vivid detail every time I had stolen. I ended at the 80-minute mark, feeling quite content at being able to gloat. Sorry, confess about all my sins to someone who was duty-bound to sit and listen. "Is that all, my son?" He spat out in a far less content voice. "Yes, Father, it is," I replied in a chirpy, smug voice. "Now how many prayers is all that gonna set me back?" I asked. And well, mate, that's when it all went a bit mental. The priest opened the patrician and stared at me for a minute or so, eyes squinting and face screwed up in what I thought was temper. He held out his right hand and said, "Take this, my son," handing me a black stoned rosary. "Your penance are within these beads and will take you 5 years. I laughed, counting that there were 60 beads and what I guess was supposed to be our Jesus at the bottom. So what? I have to say 1 prayer a month or 60 prayers a day? What prayers am I meant to say anyway? The Our Father, Hail Mary, the Glory Be? I asked the priest, putting the rosary on around my neck. Old Priesty Boy's face slowly began to unscrew and his eyes began to widen. His mouth turned from a scowl into a grin, and it scared me to my very soul. The priest, now adopting a sarcastically quizzical tone, said, "Glory be, Hail Mary." No, my son. Prayer has no place here, nor does the Virgin Mother, the saints, the Saviour, or the Father. As the words left his, I began to feel the beads of the rosary became coarse. I, in vain, tried to remove the now stuck fast chain. "The Trinity and its angels and their prayer and their mercy are no longer for you, my son." Have you ever felt so scared that it felt almost like fire spreading up through your veins, from your chest out to your limbs? The baseline shot of terror that hits you in an instant of shock, but instead of fading, holds tight, it grips on you. almost pushing your blood vessels to burst under the pressure? Well, that's how it felt, fighting the bile, courting the base of my throat. I managed to ask, "So, what are my penance?" The priest coldly put his hand on my shoulder. "Once a month you must kill somebody, and not just anybody. It must be someone who has shown you kindness. You must kill them and bring me their heart." Now maybe my fear hit critical mass, maybe my survival instincts began to kick in, or maybe I am indeed just a bastard. But after he told me this, I began to think in a sadistic but logical way. I was still scared, but my logical thoughts were telling me that I was in no position to get myself out of this. If the ever-burning feeling on my chest coming from the beads were as immovable as they felt. And with that being the case, I thought I'd better get the ground rules for this setup clear. I took a deep, laboured breath and began to ask Priesty Boy a few questions. 4 questions to be exact. My first question was, what would constitute an act of kindness? The priest answered that it could be anything from a doctor's treatment to a kind word. My second question was, who exactly is the figure on the base of the rosary, as I'm pretty sure by now it's not Jesus? The priest answered, "That son is your new Lord, our Lord, and you will do well to hold him in reverence." The third question I asked was, what happens to me if I fail? His eyes lit up with sadistic glee as he answered, "Each of the beads on your chest are, as you by now are aware of, are now embedded into your chest. They will continue to embed themselves further and further into your chest until they reach your heart, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you what will happen when they do. Not to worry too much, my son. They will take 5 years to reach your heart, but for every heart you bring to me, one of the beads will drop out of the chain and out of your chest harmlessly. The chain and the symbol of our Lord, however, will remain, harmless but forever with you. And my son, to answer your question, if you should ever fail, that you will be before the Lord himself and will have to answer to him. Let me warn you, my son, that our Lord has no time for compassion or second chances." Well, that sure as hell cleared that up, didn't it? For a minute or two, I stood before the priest and simply wept of the hopelessness of my situation, cried for my fate. Hot, wet tears ran down my cheeks, and I thought of the fate that awaited me should I fail in this horrid, hellish task. After that, I thought I must have cracked. I felt hopeless, resigned to my fate, and the only thought left in my head was, I'm sure I can make something from this. With this thought, I asked my last question. So, if you just want the heart, can I have the rest? Their money, valuables, and all that? Old Priesty Boy smiled and said, "My son, all I want is the heart. Once I have that, investigate their death, or even remember the wretched soul. So by all means, take what you want." The priest gave me a small wooden box. The box was ebony and had a latched lock, a red velvet lining, and a plain wooden-handled knife inside. My last instructions before I left were that I was to return within 4 weeks with a human heart within the box. The heart had to be cut from the body with this knife and this knife alone. Old Priesty Boy assured me that once the heart was in his possession, then there would be no repercussions for the murder, and as he stated before, what I did with the human and material remains were of no interest to him. The first one was hard. I had to keep my, now counterproductive, humanity in check whilst I found someone to be kind enough for me that would allow me to kill them. It took me 2 weeks of thinking and nerve building to do my first. Home shelter. I arrived unshaven, clothes ripped and stinking to high heaven. The man at the desk asked if I needed any help and was more than kind enough to show me where I could bed for the night. I slept in the shelter for 3 nights in the stench and loneliness of humanity's wretches. I hated them, too stupid or too proud to steal, but pathetic enough to beg at some master's table. 2 days and nights I was there. That's how long it took me to work out the desk worker's shifts and where he parked his car. 2 days to work out where he lived. I'm not bad at this. He was an old, short man. He had such a warm and caring smile. He folded like cheap lawn furniture when I belted him with the handle of my knife. He had just unlocked his door and was halfway through the threshold when I did it. Seconds it took before I was inside, door closed and locked behind us. Kicked him in the jaw first. Couldn't have him making noise now, could I? After a few boots, he passed out and I got the box open and ready. I cut his throat and left him to bleed out whilst I searched his house for money or something to fence. £300 and a gold watch. Not bad. Now, if you think anything like me, I'm sure you are thinking 2 questions, and I will answer them both. Firstly, yes, I did leave him to bleed out, so the heart would not be beating, and there would be less chance of botching the removal. Clever. Secondly, no, I didn't think to get his ATM card and PIN before I cut his throat. Stupid. But it was only my first. I knew better for next time. The second one, gain a homeless shelter. This time I only had to endure the place for one night before following the nice young volunteer home. He must have been in his late 20s. I think Mummy and Daddy must have been paying his way for his whole life, because he had a very smart flat and that was within walking distance. Now, I'm not having a pop at the little git for being a pampered rich kid. Hell, it meant I got £700 cash from his flat and $2,100 from his ATM card throughout the week. The second one got me thinking though. No, not about the evil of it all. I told you I don't have excuses. If people don't check behind them when they unlock their door or don't know how to disarm a man with a knife, well, they pay stupid tax. No, it got me thinking that I should be hitting richer people. What the priest had told me about the lack of repercussions were right. I'm even still living in my 8th victim's house as we speak, typing this out. What I had to do was find a way of getting very well-off people to be just a little kind to me. Then I could cut out their heart and harvest their wealth. The answer was easy. Manners. People are so stupid for manners. It can be just a thank you for holding a door open, or getting on the bus with a crutch and somebody giving up their seat for me. Although I'll be honest, bus kills are not very profitable. But mainly I hit the big posh hotels or hospitals. A lot of money in hospitals. Doctors find it hard to refuse helping people. Doctors are the jackpot. 15-hour shift, follow them home, and they're far too tired to put up a fight. I love doctors so caring, so kind, so easy, rich, weak, and as pathetic as the rest of them. You may think I'm a bastard, but you have to admit I can make the most out of a bad situation. Truth is now, I wouldn't change this life for the world. I get to steal, kill, and never have to worry about the law even looking for me, let alone catching me. Now I treat it like a job, but the kind of job you wake up in the morning and you can't wait to get to. I love the feeling of cold steel piercing weak flesh, the gurgle in the throat, and I'm so close to being able to look at the pathetic "why me" expression on their faces without feeling hatred for them. Close, but not there yet. Now then, I'm nearing the end of my little confession, and I will answer the question that by now you must be asking yourself. Why the confession? The answer is simple. Ego. I am now the world's greatest thief, and nobody knows about it. But anyway, that's my cross to bear. We mustn't grumble at life's hardships now, must we? Thank you, by the way, for taking time out of your life to read my little chunk of memoirs. It was very kind of you. Thank you. You have been very kind.
We had just moved into a little ranch house in the suburbs. Storybook neighbourhoods. Quiet. Friendly neighbours. Picket fences. The whole 9 yards. Suffice it to say that this was supposed to be a new start for me. A recently single dad, and my 3-year-old son. A time to move on from the previous year's drama and stress. I viewed the thunderstorm as a metaphor for this fresh start. One last show of theatrics before the dirt and grime of the past would be washed away. My son loved it, anyway, even with the power outs. It was the first big storm we'd ever seen. Flashes of lightning flooded the bare rooms of our house, imparting unpacked boxes with long, creeping shadows. He jumped and squealed as the thunder boomed. It was well past his bedtime before he'd finally settled down enough to go to sleep. The next morning, I found him awake in bed and smiling. "I watched the lightning at my window," he proudly announced. A few mornings later, he told me the same thing. "You're silly," I said. "It didn't storm last night. You were only dreaming." "Oh." He seemed somewhat disheartened. I ruffled his hair and told him not to worry. There should be another storm soon. Then it became a pattern. He would tell me how he watched the lightning outside his window at least twice a week, despite there being no storms. Reoccurring dreams of that first memorable thunderstorm, I figured. It's easy to hate myself in hindsight. Everybody assures me there's nothing I could have done, no way I could have known. But I'm supposed to be the guardian of my child. And these are useless words of comfort. I constantly relive that morning, making my coffee, pouring milk over my cereal, and picking up the newspaper to read about the paedophile local authorities had just arrested. It was front page stuff. Apparently, this guy would select a young target, usually a boy, stake out their house for a while, and take flash photos of them through their window while they slept. Sometimes he did more. My stomach sank as the connection was made. At the time, it was merely something from a child's imagination. In retrospect, it is the scariest thing I have ever heard. About a week before the predator was caught, my son came up to me in his pajamas. "Guess what?" he asked. "What?" "No more lightning at my window." I played along. "Oh, that's nice. It's finally died down, huh?" "No, now it's in my closet."
He sat under the tree in the dark and stared at the illuminated stained glass windows of the church. A few light arrivals were hurrying from the parking lot. A pair of high heels clicked up the sidewalk, the last of the faithful sounding off the final seconds. The door swung open, letting a shaft of light pierce the darkness and then pneumatically hissed shut. The night service was beginning. "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow," the chant began, with the choir leading. He watched all this from the edge of the woods in his usual Sunday night seat. He stood and automatically wiped the pants of his new blue suit. It would be an hour now before the service would end, and his mother would be back to pick him up. The 8-year-old boy dreaded the lonely Sunday ordeal, but he had stopped questioning his mother's absence. He was shunned by the other church members, and he knew it concerned his mother's past and the father he never had. At times he sat through the sermon, but the fear and tension that traveled through the crowd as they listened to the red-faced preacher frightened him. He dimly grasped the teaching of an ever-present danger of hell and damnation, but his young mind sometimes rebelled, and he sought a quiet forest. He could hear the breeze rustling the few remaining stubborn leaves. An occasional chill reminded him of the winter to come. "Are you lost?" The sudden voice shattered the quiet darkness and pricked the boy's heart into a racing flutter. He turned quickly and stared upward at the looming silhouette. The figure knelt, seeming to telescope back to normal size after its eagerly exaggerated hugeness. A round face, impossibly round, with eyes yielding space enough for several noses, although one was not immediately apparent in the vast arena, leaned toward him. A mouth, large beyond belief, as if it served double duty because of the minute nose, curved across the face like the world's last river after all else has eroded to pale desert. "I say, are you lost, boy?" Clenching bits of twigs and crushed leaves in his fists, the boy attempted to answer, but for the moment could only stammer. The gibbous face nodded with lips stretching another inch in smile. "Where do you belong?" The boy found his voice at last, but it sounded awkward. The church. I was at church." He pointed back over the hill from where the distant rumble of the preacher could still be heard, working steadily toward the meat of the sermon. Heavy, deliberate laughter came slowly from the crouched figure, as if much more was imprisoned in the barrel chest, but only a carefully measured portion was allowed to escape through those awful lips. "Slipped away from church, eh? Slipped away to the woods." The man gazed about the dark forest. "Couldn't stand to be cooped up, I'll bet. I can understand that. You'd rather visit with me than listen to the preacher go at it. Well, you found a kindred soul. I can't stand those Bible thumpers at close quarters either." The man's huge face seemed to blot out the small amount of nightlight that filtered through the trees. The boy tried to stand, but the man put a thick hand on his shoulder and held him firmly down. "Now, where do you think you're going?" The boy stared at the bulging forearm inches from his face. For a moment, he seemed to be counting the coarse black hairs that, with the movement of the breeze, appeared to be crawling along the arm. I have to go back now. They'll be missing me." The man laughed again. "No, son. You've made your choice. They wanted you, and instead you came here to me, and here you'll stay. I can't let you go now. We haven't got to know each other. I didn't ask for you, but maybe you can be of help." He tightened his grip on the boy's shoulder. "I hope so. I really hope so." All of the boy's suspicions were aroused. A terrible possibility occurred to him. When he spoke, his voice was tiny, made small by fear. "Who are you? What can I do?" The man settled himself, facing the boy, and moved his hand to grip a leg just above the ankle. "You tell me, boy. Who do you think you found here in the woods?" His leg felt like a small rope in the man's grip, but the boy spoke his heart. I think you're the devil." He trembled again. "I skipped church, and you got me." The last words were drowned in the man's laughter, louder this time. "The devil," he chuckled again. "I like that. You figured that out all by yourself in a minute of seeing me, when it's taken others quite some time before they call me by that name." He shook the boy's leg. "What do you think of this outfit?" The boy stared closely at the man's clothing for the first time. He could see a loosely fitting white shirt and pants with a faded blue strip along the legs. The dark shape of a pistol butt protruded from the waistline. That's like what they wear at the state prison." The man shook the leg in congratulations. "Right again. You are a wonder boy. I've been in there visiting friends. The laughter returned. Yes, sir, I was just visiting with some good old buddies of mine who followed in my steps. He leaned closer to the tiny figure. But there comes a time to leave, and my time came. As enjoyable as the company was to me, you can't expect me to stay there a lifetime. Sure you can, but others might have different ideas. So here I am, moving along at night and running into you. Now, as to your help, boy. Well, I don't know right offhand, but it will come. It will come. You keep real quiet, and let's look at this church you left to find me. The man retained a tight clasp on one arm, but he let the boy lead him to the edge of the forest. They stared across the lake of asphalt that surrounded the church. The light from the stained glass windows revealed only a dozen cars hurtled close to the building. Sunday evening services were attended only by the elderly, the newly converted, and a handful of the always faithful. It was hard for the boy to believe that minutes earlier he had purposely left such a safe, warm place. He wanted to cry, but his fright was beyond tears. His small brow wrinkled with effort as he sought to radiate promises of everlasting goodness in the future for a bit of help in the present. The man squatted beside him, while the strangely emotional voice from inside the church washed over them, unheard. Even when the man spoke an inch from his ear, the boy could not look at him. A pretty little church. Pretty. Not too large, but large enough for the faithful in a town this size, and large enough for me to find what I need to leave this place forever. I see some stairs there in the back, my boy. Do you know where they lead? The boy thought for a moment. It's a little room for the singers, the choir. That's where they put on their robes. The man tightened his grip on the boy's arm. Perfect. Exactly as I thought. But I needed you to be sure. A nice little choir room where they ready themselves to sing Thanksgiving. Do you remember seeing ladies' pocketbooks there? Purses, boy, where they keep their money and car keys? When the boy nodded, the man embraced him quickly before turning the child to face him directly. Inches apart, the boy could not see both the man's eyes without turning his head. The breath from the worm-like lips was overpowering. He quivered in the man's arms, ready to faint, but the man shook him to attention. Now listen carefully, boy, for your life depends on you hearing and obeying what I'm about to ask of you. He turned his head slightly toward the church, as if to keep one eye there, while the other remained tightly on the boy's white features. Think of a lady in that choir, sitting just now behind the preacher, her hands in her lap waiting for the next hymn to be sung. Think of one in particular for me, boy, one who drives a nice big car you couldn't help but remember. The man turned the boy back to face the knot of cars. Maybe she drives that green one there, or that black one next to it. Just pick out one that belongs to some nice lady and you're certain is in the choir. The boy thought for a moment before answering. The black one. The big one. It belongs to the lady who plays the organ. But she dresses with the singers, too. That will do nicely, boy. She doesn't have to sing. I'll sing for both of us for miles and miles. Now you, my little friend, just slip across to the church, up those stairs, and find the organ lady's purse. Don't try to bring it all back. All I need are the keys. Her little fold of money would be a nice present, but that's just a suggestion. The keys are the thing. The boy could not think. His mind swam with indecision, while his body ached to curl on the ground and rest. The man shook him with impatience.
You've got to do it. If you don't, I'll send you to hell in a minute, and you'll never see your dear mother again. What we do to little boys when we get them there. But I don't want to frighten you with that. Do this for me and I'll let you go back. You're a tough little one. I could see that right off. And smart. A little girl I wouldn't trust with this job, but you can do it and live to tell about it. The time you helped the devil himself.
He turned to the boy to face him again, and that wide mouth folded into a line of determination.
You see this pistol, don't you, boy? Yes, I knew you had. As sure as I'm the devil himself, I can pop your little skull with this gun and send you to hell right now.
Tears blurred the boy's vision, but he wiped them on his sleeve.
I'll do it. Just let me do it and go away. I won't ever skip church.
The man interrupted.
Now that's all right. You do this little thing for me and you'll have the devil behind you. Just don't bang about and get yourself caught. No excuses. If you don't come back, I'll carry you away to where the sun never shines and little boys cry for all eternity.
After one final look at that terrible smile, the boy lunged from the forest toward the church. He could hear the low laughter over the soft padding of his feet and the quick gasps of his lungs. The wind cut through his thin clothing to damp skin, chilling him thoroughly. He felt no relief as the distance from the strange, awful man increased. The terrible, lonely responsibility was worse than the grip of certain death. He hesitated a second at the bottom of the steps, listening under the preacher's loud exhortations for the sounds of other adults. Hearing none, he climbed quickly and slipped into the small room. Coats, sweaters, and hats dotted a score of folding metal chairs. He found the purses grouped together in a corner. It took just a moment to find the one he sought, a green leather one large enough to hold a small dog. A frantic digging uncovered the keys, and he was quickly out the door and down the stairs. He stopped at the edge of the woods, unable to see the man in the darkness. After a few tentative steps, he listened carefully, but could hear only the night sounds of the forest. Relief was a moment from flooding his mind when he turned slightly, and his eyes focused on the man sitting just to one side of the path. The boy was more shaken by the silent discovery than he would have been from a sudden gesture or noise. For an eternity of seconds, they stared at each other without movement. The boy raised an arm, unclasped a fist, and displayed the keys. A long, even row of teeth appeared in the dark face.
Ah, the keys. Well done, my boy, well done. Now we must give him a try, and quickly, for this silence no doubt means the prayer at the end of the sermon. That leaves a verse or two of hymn, a benediction, and then a swift, sure discovery of your little theft.
He rose and stepped to the boy's side.
Perhaps we'll be lucky, and a few lost ones will choose this moment to step down the aisle and prompt another verse or two.
I can't go with you. You said if I... The man grabbed the boy by both arms.
Now, I know what I said. Just come with me to the edge of town. If I free you now, your hallelujahs might embarrass me in front of the congregation.
The man tucked the boy under his arm, and his free arm kept all screams and cries from escaping. As they crossed the parking lot, the boy, half choked and dazed with fear, ceased to struggle. The car started easily and the man edged it slowly away from the church toward the highway. In a few moments, the town was behind them, and the man sighed with noise and apparent relish. He watched the edges of the highway carefully.
Need a little road. A nice quiet road for us to conclude our deal.
The boy stirred in the front seat as the car left the highway and bounced in the ruts of a dirt road. His eye fell on the black grip of the pistol peeking out from the loose clothing, and a desperate hope was born. The man did not stop until the road ended at the ruins of a burned homestead. A bleached chimney tottered over the weeds. The man turned toward the boy and sighed again.
You know, I make a pretty poor devil. Up till now, I've done my best with the role.
He shook his head.
But I have to admit, temptation came my way at last. I mean, boy, I was actually tempted for a moment to let you go.
The boy crouched in a corner as far from the massive figure as possible. His fright was bottled up and put away. His body tingled with alertness. One small hand slipped from a jacket pocket and crawled along the seat. When he spoke, the boy didn't recognize his own voice. "You promised." The man suppressed a laugh.
Sometimes I promise too much, boy. I did threaten to send you to hell.
The dark figure moved across the seat.
But since you were such a good fellow, I'll send you to heaven instead.
At the movement, the boy deftly snatched the pistol and pointed it at the massive head. He saw the startled look on that hideous face as his fingers searched for the trigger that was not there. Not understanding, he jerked back against the window and in the moonlight stared with horror at the crudely carved piece of wood covered with black shoe polish. The same moonlight gave him one final glimpse of that wide, awful smile.
Chilling tales for dark nights.